Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you are watching NewsX Eurozone. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has imposed Ukraine-related sanctions on Russian oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, targeting companies that fund the Kremlin's war machine. The US Treasury Department says further action is possible, calling for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry has slammed US energy sanctions, calling them counterproductive to peace efforts in Ukraine. Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has maintained that Russia's goals in Ukraine remain unchanged and stressed that the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. EU leaders to show strong support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at Brussels summit, discussing use of frozen Russian assets of 163 billion as a reparation loan to Ukraine. The EU has also planned a new sanction package against Russia, including a ban on Russian LNG from 2027, while Kyiv seeks autonomy over how the loan funds are spent. Ukraine reports 7 deaths from Russian strikes, including 2 children. Meanwhile, US Vice President Marco Rubio has stated that US still wants to meet Russia despite putting the sanctions on Russia. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has arrived in Brussels for the first ever EU-Egypt summit aimed at strengthening political and economic ties under the 2024 Strategic and Comprehensive Partnership. The summit also focused on Egypt's crucial role in maintaining the Gaza ceasefire and leading post-conflict reconstruction efforts. India has restricted online content takedown powers to senior bureaucrats and police officials, following a legal clash with Elon Musk's X over Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 2023 internet policy. The move coming after X lost a September court challenge is seen as a relief for the platform. US President Donald Trump has said that he expects to reach a trade deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping during their meeting next week in South Korea. Trump has also planned to discuss China's purchase of Russian oil and possibly restart US soybean exports. He further mentioned that a deal on nuclear arms could be on the table. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hints at opposition to any Turkish security forces being deployed in Gaza during a meeting with UN on the second day of Vance's visit. Israel has also buried more than 50 bodies handed over, while Vance has expressed optimism that the ceasefire will hold, and US Senator Marco Rubio is expected to visit Israel soon. Now we start with EU. EU leaders from the Renew Europe group expressed their approval after the United States imposed sanctions on Russia's major oil companies, accusing Moscow of showing little commitment to ending the war in Ukraine. This comes as EU countries formally adopted their 19th sanctions package against Russia, which includes a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas imports. Let's listen into what was said.
Ça va dans la bonne direction et évidemment on s'en félicite. C'est la première véritable décision de sanction des États-Unis contre la Russie depuis le retour de Donald Trump. Donc évidemment c'est un symbole fort.
I'm very pleased that we have been able to come to the 19th package of the sanction because we have to put pressure on Russia to come to the peace. At the same time, we have to help Ukraine, and I hope that the leaders will be able soon to come to the decision about the recovery, reconstruction loan.
And there are, of course, important, weighty decisions to be made at the European Council. My main message here to my colleagues from Renew Europe is that despite some of the more confusing attitudes and positions of my government, my country, by and large, that is Slovakia, wants to be, desires to be in Europe that is built on the rule of law, on democracy. My country, by and large, wants to demonstrate solidarity with Ukraine, stand up to Russian aggression.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at this, being 19 sanctions on Russia, do you think this will be effective as the countries want it to be, or this will just accelerate Moscow's isolation and risk destabilizing global energy markets?
Well, the point of the sanctions announced by Donald Trump last night is to send a strong message to Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin that he is serious about wanting the ceasefire, which Russia so far has not committed to and doesn't want to commit to. It's the very reason why Donald Trump pulled off the meeting with Vladimir Putin in Budapest. So this is the first time that Donald Trump has actually announced sanctions, and they're serious sanctions. They're on Russia's two biggest oil companies and their subsidiaries. So this will really hit Russia's war efforts and its economy. And he is sending a message to Vladimir Putin: I didn't want to do this, but I'm having to do this because I want this war to be over and I want there to be a ceasefire. We haven't seen so far how Russia will react or has reacted, but that is the point of this message. Donald Trump doesn't want to put these sanctions on Russia, but he feels he has to because no progress has been made and any peace talks or settlement has been stalled for the moment.
How do you analyze, building on that, how do you analyze US and Russia relations now? Do you think there is still a chance that there could be a bilateral talk or trilateral summit soon?
No. There was talk. It was just a proposal. It was reported everywhere. There would be talks in Budapest, in Hungary. Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin and with Donald Trump. But there was a phone call between Marco Rubio, the US State Secretary, and the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and they decided there was no point pursuing that. The reason they don't want to pursue these talks is that Donald Trump feels that there is no progress at the moment can be made on a ceasefire or stopping hostilities. At the moment, I think the ball is in Russia's court if it wants to continue to have a relationship, a good relationship, as Putin has enjoyed with Trump. Then it's up to them to take an initiative to show that they are serious about stopping the war or reaching a ceasefire. So I think Donald Trump has upped the ante, and now we're going to see how Russia will respond. But I think it's definitely, if Russia doesn't respond in the way that Trump wants, it will definitely be a cooling of relationships between Washington and Moscow.
Thank you very much, Alison, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Russia has reported that the death toll from an explosion at a military plant near the Ural city of Chelyabinsk has now risen to 12 people. According to national reports, the incident took place yesterday and also left 5 people injured. Local authorities have too confirmed the explosion, and the governor of Chelyabinsk, Alexei Texler, has stated that the fire has been already extinguished. Governor Texler has also assured that there was no threat to city residents or civilian infrastructure in the aftermath of the blast. Additionally, Russian investigators have opened a criminal case into this incident, but there is no evidence linking the explosion to any drone activity. Now for this discussion, we go back to Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau, joins us live from London. Thank you, Alison, for staying with us. Alison, going back to and building on our discussion from our first discussion, bringing India into picture, what are the geopolitical implications of India's potential adjustment which could follow after the U.S. sanctions are imposed, new U.S. measures?
Sorry, I caught the sound here isn't very good. Are you talking about the explosion in the Urals at the oil plant or the sanctions?
I was building on our first discussion, I was continuing that, and I wanted to ask, do you think India would follow or potentially adjust to US's demands about its crude oil imports, to curb the crude oil imports?
That's what it will happen. I don't know what effect these sanctions will have. I know the EU today is having discussions whether they are going to slap, I think it's the 19th set of sanctions on Russia after they overcame opposition by the Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico last night, who again is more pro-Trump than the other EU leaders. He has dropped his objection, so the EU is going to slap more sanctions on Russia, and they're very pleased that Trump has finally agreed to sanctions on Vladimir Putin. Whether other countries will follow suit, I don't know.
Thank you for sharing that. And Alison, today, talking about today's news, we also saw that there was I forgot, I don't recall which one was it, but a European minister who was talking about the potential risks and risk sharing in unfreezing the frozen Russian assets. So what do you think could be the potential consequences for Ukraine if Belgium's opposition delays or blocks the proposed reparation loan?
Yeah, we have this 300, I think it's, I can't remember, is it 300 billion, I'm not sure, of assets which are frozen in Belgium. Yes. And obviously that's a stand that the EU has taken, but it's a very tricky issue legally. And also it's very hard to get all the countries agreeing what to do with these sanctions. For example, in Romania has reparations it wants historical reparations it wants from Moscow. They shipped gold there in 1917 and they still haven't received it back. Other countries have reparations they'd like from Moscow. Whether it's legally possible to tap these assets to get to these Russian assets to get that back is another question. And there are also questions about what should this money be used for? Should it just stay there? Or, can it be used towards Ukraine's war effort? But it is a tricky legal issue and it will probably involve international tribunals to decide what can be done with it rather than just sitting there. But again, it's another issue on the table. It's another issue that is putting pressure on Vladimir Putin and Moscow.
Thank you very much, Alison, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Two Ukrainian journalists have been killed in the eastern city of Kramatorsk by Russian drone strike. The attack was confirmed by local media and followed initial reports from the Donetsk regional governor. The incident adds to the rising tensions in the region, where media personnel have been targeted amid the conflict. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also reported 6 deaths and at least 17 injuries after Russian strikes targeted cities and energy infrastructure across Ukraine. Zelensky has also stated that residential buildings were hit, with fires breaking out in Zaporizhia and damage reported in Kyiv. The attacks impacted several regions, including Kyiv, Odessa, and Dnipro. Ukraine's air defense forces and drone interceptors were actively responding. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Alison Mutler. She's a former AP bureau chief in Romania, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Alison, for staying with us throughout this topic. Now, looking back and building on our discussion from earlier, do you think should EU collectively bear legal and financial liabilities tied to the frozen Russian assets?
Again, as I said before, it's a big question. It's a legal question. The assets are there. There are a lot of people who would like to get their hands on those assets, various things, whether it's the Ukrainian war effort. There are countries in the former Warsaw Pact, meaning former communist countries who are now in the European Union, like the Baltic states, like Romania, who have historical reparations they want from Moscow and would like the use of these assets, but it's a very tricky legal issue, and not just legal, it would require all the countries of the European Union agreeing. And as several countries have demands, then it's very tricky.
And lastly, Alison, what do you think if there could be, where could the next trilateral or bilateral summit take place in, if it were to take place?
Very good question there. I think for the moment, we've all been waiting for this meeting, or this summit to take place in Budapest in Hungary in the next couple of weeks. It's now been, not only has it been cancelled or cancelled, but there has been no plans for a new meeting. Donald Trump has said that he doesn't think any progress can be made in a ceasefire or ending the war in Ukraine. And so for the moment, he has no plans to meet Vladimir Putin. You know that Donald Trump is, in his peace efforts abroad, he's a man of a president of action, and he doesn't like endless talks going on and on with no result. He wants results like we had in the Middle East. And if he feels he's not going to have any results in with the Ukrainian conflict, then he will just wash his hands of it, at least temporarily. He is waiting for a response from Moscow. If Moscow does come back to the negotiating table and offers something that Trump feels is acceptable, then we could look at a bilateral or a trilateral meeting. But for the moment, there is no bilateral or trilateral meeting on the horizon until we get a response from Moscow showing that he's understood the pressure that Trump and the European Union are putting on Russia.
Thank you very much, Alison Mutler, for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news all the way from London. Thank you. Now we move on to Africa. Egypt has signed a €4 billion memorandum of understanding with the European Union to strengthen economic cooperation and support local reforms. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has attended the signing ceremony in Brussels alongside European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa. The agreement includes a financial package and support for Egypt's participation in the EU's Horizon Europe research program. President Sisi has emphasized the strategic partnership between Egypt and the EU, highlighting opportunities in sectors like pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence. He has further stressed the EU's role as Egypt's top trading partner, noting discussions on integrating Egypt into European supply chains and expanding investment opportunities. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations specialist, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mohammed Osman, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this news, does this partnership signal a shift in Europe's strategy towards deeper engagement with North African states and Egypt?
Thank you for having me, Asuma. Again, always a pleasure to be with you and on NewsX World. Indeed, Egypt and the European Union have a very long-lasting and deep-rooted strategic relationship that dates back to the early 2000s. The two countries, Egypt and the European Union, have signed a comprehensive partnership agreement back in 2004, and also some sort of limited free trade agreement also in 2009. And in 2024, both counterparts renewed and expanded their strategic relationship by signing a new strategic partnership agreement. And indeed, as part of this agreement, the European Union supported Egypt's economy with a package of economic support that was worth about $8 billion, or 7.5 billion euros to be more precise. And now Egypt and the European Union hold their first summit ever in Brussels. And of course, this reflects the weight and magnitude of Egypt in its regional surrounding, whether in North Africa or in the entirety of the African continent or in the Middle East as well, and the Islamic world and the global South. Egypt is a very preeminent power in these circles and has great weight, and therefore it has been bestowed with the quote-unquote honor of having a summit of its own with the European Union, which represents about 27 countries. The European Union is the second largest foreign investor in the Egyptian economy, tens of billions of euros of investment in renewable energy, in fossil energy, and in industry and agriculture as well. And at the same time, also Egypt, one of the main receivers of Egyptian exports is the European Union. Also, there is a very deep cooperation between both the European Union and Egypt in the spheres of defense and security, and also in combating illegal immigration and cross-border crime as well as terrorism. And this is what makes Egypt a very valuable partner for the Europeans, as Egypt is one of the main countries in North Africa that stifles the flow of illegal migrants from North Africa and the African continent and the Middle East to Europe. And this is something that Europe appreciates, and in turn does lend more support to Egypt's economy in this regard. And also Europe is keen on diversifying its economic relationship and strategic relationships with various actors, with Egypt, with India, with Japan, with even with China, despite the tensions, because they know that the economic dependency on the United States in many aspects right now is creating a problem for them. And also their previously increased reliance in the past on Russian energy, of course, came to the test when the Russia-Ukraine war started, and Europe had to cut off most of its economic ties with the Russian Federation. And now Egypt will be one of the prime sources of natural gas that will provide Europe with energy, cheap energy rather, due to and compensate the loss of Russian gas. And on the other hand, also Egypt has been keen since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was elected in 2014 on diversifying Egypt's foreign relations and partnerships. So Egypt has a strategic partnership, of course, with the United States, a long and standing strategic partnership with the European Union, and also a very strong and deep strategic relationship with China, with Russia, and with India. So Egypt seeks, and Egypt also joined the BRICS very recently. So as you can see, Asuma, Egypt is always playing this balancing act as to stay positively neutral and at the same time being very positively interactive with the major world powers.
And Osman, building on that, you've mentioned all the good points or positive outcomes, but could there be any negative outcomes as well, such as risking ties while getting closer economic ties with the EU? Could it affect Egypt's relationship with other major partners of it, such as the Gulf states or China?
No, I don't think so. These partnerships are complementary to one another. Now we are in a globalized world, Asuma, and what counts in this respect is the political stance of Egypt. And Egypt always adopts this policy of non-alignment. And as you very well know, Asuma, Egypt, along with India and Indonesia and other countries back in the 1950s, founded the non-aligned movement, and it has been its main goal was to prevent or not to leave the nations of the global south susceptible to the polarization of the conflicts of the great powers and the competition between the great powers. And I think that Egypt is doing just that. As I just said, Egypt, even though it maintains very deep ties with the European Union, for example, on the other hand, it has also a very strong ties with Russia. Russia is investing heavily in the Egyptian economy, building the country's first nuclear power plant worth about $25 billion. Russia is also one of Egypt's main defense partners, and they maintain a very strong relationship. Russia supplies Egypt with arms, for example, and even transfers arms technology to Egypt since the time of the Soviet Union. And Egypt, in turn, also has had a very balanced stance towards the war in Ukraine, for example. So Egypt did vote in favor of the UN resolution condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, Egypt rejected publicly applying any unilateral sanctions on Russia. And Egypt did stress that the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict, which is NATO expansion, basically needs to be treated as part of the solution of this war. And at the same time, Egypt refrained from imposing sanctions and maintained and even deepened its strategic relationship with Russia. But at the same time, it is very keen not to lose its European partners and allies, and deepens its economic relations with them, and also their cooperation on security matters as well as matters of border security and illegal immigration. Because basically, Egypt stands to gain a lot from these strategic partnerships. Egypt also very recently signed, about a year ago, or even more, a strategic partnership agreement with India. Narendra Modi visited Egypt. President al-Sisi visited India as well, and was hosted as a guest of honor in the national parade in India. So as you can see, Egypt is very keen on diversifying its international relations and its foreign relations in general, not to be completely reliant on the United States, as was the case before the year 2013.
And as you mentioned, Egypt does remain Russia's biggest trading partner in North Africa. And last year, their trade surpassed $9 billion. So how do you think, how will it manage the conflict of interest, or how will it manage the conflict of interest with EU and Russia, while getting closer to EU, while having closer ties with Russia?
I think Russia understands Egypt's relationship with other countries. Russia understands that Egypt is a strategic partner and a friend, not an ally. We are not an ally of anyone, actually. Egypt maintains neutrality with regards to many of the regions and the world's conflicts, as to avoid the consequences of this extreme polarization. And Egypt, along with countries like South Africa and Brazil and many other countries around the world from the global south, do advocate for the idea of this positive neutrality in order not to get engulfed in any of the ongoing conflicts in the world. Because at the same time, Russia understands this fully, and they do understand that Egypt has a strategic partnership with both the United States and the European Union, and they have no reservations on that. And on the other side, they do appreciate how Egypt was keen on not to join the sanctions against Russia, and even the trade grew much larger, as you just said, Asuma. When the Ukraine war started in 2022, Egyptian trade between Egypt and Russia stood at around 5.5 billion. Now, as you just said, it stands in 2024, by the end of 2024, at about 9 billion annually. So it doubled, almost doubled, basically within the span of 3.5 years. And Egypt is very keen to maintain this relationship. And at the same time, also, Egypt is very eager to maintain its relations with the European Union, and the European Union understands that Egypt will not forfeit its relations with countries like Russia or China, so that they would maintain the relations with the EU, or vice versa. So Egypt has established itself as this neutral actor that leads an independent foreign policy, and its partners do respect Egypt's entitlement to exercise that right.
And lastly, Osman, now that Egypt, as you mentioned, it can balance this and diversifying all this in middle of all the geopolitical things going on now, how will this 4 billion EU-Egypt agreement reshape Cairo's economic and political alignment?
I think it will aid in pushing forward the economic reforms President al-Sisi has been leading for the past 10 years. Egypt has been witnessing drastic economic reforms in cooperation with the IMF and even other international partners like the EU and China and the Arab Gulf states as well, who all supported Egypt's economic reforms in this comprehensive form of cooperation, and these reforms did yield positive results, with inflation being reduced significantly, and also with economic growth being moving forward, even with the crises of COVID and the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, which caused a huge shock to the supply chains, economic supply chains all around the world, and also the war in the Middle East and in Gaza, and with the closure of the disruption of maritime navigation in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which inflicted upon Egypt about $10 billion of losses due to the reduction of navigation in the Suez Canal. Yet Egypt, despite all of this, the economy is still growing. Egypt has recorded a growth rate, and its economy is forecasted to grow at about 4% this year. And this package by the European Union will further support the development, economic development inside Egypt, as it is mostly directed towards supporting small businesses and small industries in Egypt. And Egypt is working forward on a policy to augment its exports, especially industrial exports and non-oil exports abroad. And within the past 10 years, Egypt's exports have grown from 26 billion in 2011 or 2014 rather, and now they stand at around 52 or 53 billion dollars. And one of the main recipients of Egyptian exports is the European Union. So for the European Union, Egypt is a source of cheap commodities, whether agricultural or industrial, and both countries, the European Union and Egypt, do have a free trade agreement. So this will further facilitate Egypt's ability to increase its exports to the European Union, and also will make Egyptian goods accessible to European markets at cheap prices, which is beneficial to the European Union as well. So this EU package is mutually beneficial for both sides. Assume, as you can see, it is not charity or anything of this sort.
Okay. I thought over there you were about to say make Egypt great again over there. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I'm entitled to love my country, you know.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Always great learning from you. Thank you, Muhammad Osman, for joining us and sharing that insight as an international relations specialist. Now we move on to our next news. Dutch Prime Minister contender Henry Von ten Bal is emerging as the frontrunner ahead of the October 29 elections, with his center-right CDA party gaining significant momentum. Von ten Bal has emphasized the need for a stable government focused on tackling major issues like housing, asylum, and investing in the future economy.
In de eerste plaats, in Nederland hebben we een vrij chaotische periode achter de rug. Wat we nodig hebben is een stabiel kabinet. Een stabiel kabinet wat er 4 jaar zit. Wat bereid is om samen te werken en een aantal grote problemen in Nederland op te lossen. In Nederland hebben we een probleem met de woningnood. In Nederland hebben we een probleem met de asielketen die niet op orde is. Het stikstofprobleem is niet opgelost en dat zorgt ervoor dat ondernemers niet kunnen ondernemen. En wij investeren te weinig.
He has called for renewed Dutch leadership in Europe, warning against rising autocratic tendencies and stressing that populism cannot be defeated by adopting populist tactics. Let's listen in.
Ik denk op 2 manieren. In de eerste plaats niet mee te gaan met het populisme. Ik zeg steeds, je kunt het populisme niet verslaan door zelf de instrumenten van het populisme te gebruiken. En in de tweede plaats een beter verhaal, maar wel gecombineerd met de resultaten. Want we kunnen ons afzetten tegen populistische partijen, dat is niet zo moeilijk. Maar uiteindelijk zal een volgend kabinet hele concrete resultaten moeten boeken op de problemen die ik net schets. Want de brandstof voor het populisme kun je alleen wegnemen doordat je ook echt de onderliggende problemen die er ook zijn, dat je die wegneemt. Eigenlijk zoals we dat in Nederland wel gewend waren lange tijd. Nederland is een coalitieland. Wij hebben geen 2-partijenstelsel. Ik geloof ook echt dat de Nederlandse bevolking is niet extreem aan een van de 2 kanten. De meeste Nederlanders willen gematigd beleid vanuit het politieke midden, maar wel politieke partijen die echt daadwerkelijk oplossingen realiseren en resultaten boeken. En de Nederlandse samenleving heeft respect voor politici die een compromis sluiten, maar willen ook veel meer samenwerking zien. En dat ontbreekt op dit moment in de politiek. Nee, zeker niet. Ik denk dat de klimaatuitdaging zoals die er is nog even urgent is als altijd. Maar juist omdat ik hem zo urgent vind ik dat we dat we ons klimaatbeleid in Nederland sterk moeten enten op het Europese klimaatbeleid. Want dat Europees klimaatbeleid voeren is echt efficiënter en effectiever dan alleen Nederlands klimaatbeleid. Je ziet nu dat er veel concurrentie is tussen lidstaten onderling. Maar Europa moet ook op het gebied van...
Upon his arrival at the EU summit, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has spoken on his commitment to addressing housing scarcity, especially in Spain. Additionally, Sánchez has emphasized that the Spanish government is advocating for EU-based mechanisms that would make funds available for social housing. He has also urged action to curb speculation in the housing market and stressed the importance of addressing congestion in large cities. Let's listen in.
Cuando hablamos de pilar social, cuando hablamos de una Europa que esté al servicio de los ciudadanos, pues tenemos que hablar también de vivienda. Y eso es lo que el Gobierno de España va a defender hoy en el Consejo Europeo. Que habilitemos fondos para construcción de vivienda protegida, que pongamos en marcha mecanismos para poder poner freno a la especulación en la compra de vivienda para no uso residencial y finalmente que nos habiliten palancas también a nivel europeo para poder hacer frente en las grandes ciudades a las zonas tensionadas. No olvidemos que en el caso de España, y para un gobierno además comprometido en la lucha contra la desigualdad en un 60% en muchos de nuestros ciudadanos y ciudadanas tiene que ver con la imposibilidad para poder acceder a la compra o al alquiler de una vivienda. Por tanto, además de todos los asuntos que son muy importantes, evidentemente la vivienda va a jugar un papel central en el debate.
Now, for decades, the EU has steered clear of tackling housing issues directly, leaving it to national authorities. However, national leaders now acknowledging the scale of the crisis are set to discuss it at the European Council. This marks a significant shift in the EU's approach, with the European Commission and Parliament also pushing for housing solutions. And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.